I finished residency in 2006 and started investing. And then, 2008, things started not looking so good, and the market was dropping, but I kept investing. Market kept dropping, kept investing, bottomed out. In hindsight, we know now, March of 2009, big drop in the stock market is actually beneficial when you are early in your career and you have money to invest. As long as it bounces back, which it always has throughout the history of this country, it's hard to find a time where over a more than 10-year period, you don't come out ahead by just staying the course, investing a portion of your paycheck. Eventually you'll come out ahead.
Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. My name is Chad Carson. You can call me Coach, and this is a show all about investing in real estate, achieving financial independence, and doing more of what matters. Whether you're a longtime listener or a brand new listener, thank you so much for being with me for another episode. The topic of today's episode is a doctor's recommendation for financial independence. This is an interview with Physician on Fire. His name is Leif. He's a friend of mine, and he has a great blog at physicianonfire.com. And the conversation today is about a lot of things related to financial independence. His profession, obviously, was as a physician. He was an anesthesiologist. And doctors, as you probably know, make a lot of money. They have some of the higher salaries on the spectrum of different people working different jobs. But it was interesting to go through his journey and the kind of typical doctor's journey of going to college, going to medical school, racking up debt, going through to residency, where it's basically an apprenticeship after college and medical school. And we talk about that journey. We talk about some of the habits that he used and that other high income earners can use to accomplish financial independence. When we talked about why he chose to leave the medical profession in his early 40s, he has 2 young kids, what he's doing with travel. They're doing some homeschool, or as we called it, world school. So we had conversations about both my family's travels and his family's travels. But then we get into a lot of the nitty gritty of his financial portfolio. So how he allocates his money to different investments. And we kind of compared it to my own, more real estate centric investments. He has more of a stock portfolio, but we both have a mix. And so we compare and contrast those. And I think those details will be very interesting to you, just to get an outside the box idea of how different people approach financial independence, and especially not running out of money when you stop working, and using entrepreneurship, using different types of investment and diversification. So we get into all of that in this conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Before we get started, I want to remind you that if you're new here, be sure to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast player, or on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. I have new episodes that come out every Monday morning, and you don't want to miss anything. Also, each week I include show notes for this episode with any links that we reference during the conversation. You can find a link to those show notes in the description of the podcast below, or in the video description on YouTube. Finally, if you like the show, we always appreciate if you support us by leaving some reviews, especially on Apple Podcast. As a way of saying thank you to those of you who've already left a review, I give away a copy of my book, Retire Early with Real Estate, each week to one person who's already left a review. Please keep listening all the way to the end of the episode for this week's winner. Now let's get to my interview with Leif from Physician on Fire. Hey, Leif, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chad. Good to be here. Good to see you, man.
Yeah, you as well. This is something I've been looking forward to. We chat a lot. We're in a mastermind group together and seen each other off and on at different occasions. But to be able to interview you and share kind of your story and what you've been through is going to be fun. I want to talk about a lot of things. I want to get into some real estate investing eventually, because I know you kind of have a different angle on that, and you've gone a different path there. And I want to talk investing strategy.
Yeah.
But I thought it'd be fun. All of us know our doctors. We have physicians. We have some physicians in the audience as well. But I'd love to go back and just talk about your career. Educate people a little bit about what is the educational path of a physician. Your website's Physician on Fire. You're now retired as a physician, but I think it'd be fun just to show some of the journey you had to go through just to get to where you were as a physician.
Sure. So, like you, I went to 4 years of undergrad. Unlike you, I didn't play linebacker or any athletics at the University of Minnesota, which is where I went to undergrad. And I stayed there for medical school, which is another 4 years after undergrad. So I finished up with my 8 years of education there at age 26. And from that point, you have decided at the end of medical school what sort of specialty you want to pursue in terms of what kind of doctor you want to be. I chose to be an anesthesiologist. That was another 4 years. of residency, which is essentially like an apprenticeship. You learn on the job with advancing responsibilities as you go through the years. So yeah, finished up at age 30, started out, with basically a zero or negative net worth with some student loan debt. That's the path. It was 12 years for me.
Yeah, so you're about 30 years old, and just so people know as well, you took a fork in the road. I remember reading some of your kind of history on your website that you had some opportunities to go to other schools, and I think a lot of people who get out of school, whether they're physician or other careers, student debt's a really big topic these days. How did you decide to go to the state school and go that route, which is probably cheaper than some of the other options you could have gone to instead of doing something else?
Yeah, I thought I was big timer back in high school. I had, really good grades and scores and all of that. And I figured I might go to like a top 10 school. So I applied to, some of the more well-known names out there. I know Duke let me in, a few others that, like Vanderbilt and some other good schools. Harvard said no. And that kind of made me mad. I still kind of hold a grudge there, but I ended up getting an offer, and the University of Minnesota had not done this before, but they had started selling license plates with the U of M logo on it. And they used the money from the proceeds to offer 4 full tuition scholarships. And I was one of the 4 people they called and said, hey, we can let you go to school for free here. You'll just pay your room and board. And I had a number of other scholarships, including a 4-year scholarship through the Byrd Foundation, Robert C. Byrd, that's a senator, and some other like one-offs. So it ended up being a fairly easy decision from a financial standpoint. And both my mom and dad, and my dad's dad had gone to that school and done well for themselves. So I thought, yeah, I think I can stay home and go to the U. And it ended up being, I think, a good decision in a lot of ways, certainly financial.
Yeah, for sure. I had sort of a similar, different path, but going to a state university or a big public university as opposed to going and then getting a football scholarship. So that paid my way. And just when you college, you had to go to another 4 years. Like, how is medical school normally paid for? Like, what's the mechanism to do that?
Well, loans are the big, big way that I'd say 75% of people pay for it. About 20 to 25% of students come out with no debt because their parents, paid for their schooling. It's almost impossible to work your way through medical school because the hours are so demanding. It's tough to keep down much of a job. Some people have some, side gigs that they can kind of manage, but I certainly didn't find the time to work during medical school. So I took out some loans, but again, I stayed in state. And this was 20 some years ago now. I started in 1998, 23 years ago. And so the tuition back then started at just under 10 grand for an in-state student. I think now it's maybe closer to 30 grand, maybe 25 if you're in state and 50 plus if you're out of state. So lots of loans. Some of those come from the federal government. There are private loan companies too that help bridge the gap. And the average student finishes medical school, if they have debt, with over $200,000 worth of debt.
That's the average. The average
That's
is
the average, and it can be double or more. Yeah.
Wow. So you get out of school, you've gone to 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, you got a couple $100,000 in debt, and you go through that residency period, which for you as an anesthesiologist was 4 years. I'm sure there's different time periods there, but are you making money at that point, or are you get apprenticeship? Do you still make a little bit of money at that to do that?
I would say similar to like a public school teacher salary. So for me, it was maybe 38 to 41,000. Nowadays, it's maybe 50 to 60,000 a year. Right. So you can get by, especially if you can put those loans in deferment or forbearance or refinance and have low payments. But you're not getting ahead certainly on a resident salary.
Right. So you're paying for your living expenses, trying to save a little bit of money, but you're not chucking away at the $200,000 until you get out of your residency. And at that point, depending on what type of doctor you are, usually get a pretty good salary. I mean, do you know the averages for other physicians? I know that depends on your specialty, but maybe just to give people a relative kind of comparison there.
Yep. And there are certainly lots of published figures. And Some are based on a 40-hour work week, which we all tend to work more than that. And so if you see a number under 200,000, that's probably based on someone working 40 hours. But true full-time physicians are, I would say, making from the low 200s to 500 and up, depending on specialty. Primary care being on the lower end, and surgical subspecialties being on the higher end.
Yeah. So I know you talk about, and I know the White Coat Investor, and there's a lot of great blogs out there about financial information for physicians and other medical professionals. How would you characterize, we've talked about that journey of yourself, but like what's the unique path of doctors from a financial standpoint? Or, the kind of joke, I had family members who were dentists and a couple of doctors as well. The joke was that, doctors didn't know how to invest their money typically. They just, get into some of the bad deals locally. Obviously there's some generalization there, but what are some of the, I guess, the unique paths that physicians have to take from the financial standpoint?
Right. Well, we've touched on some of the uniqueness. It's the large student loan debt combined with suddenly a very large income that might go up 5x or 10x literally overnight.
Right.
And so, on one hand, physicians are used to living sort of a paycheck to paycheck, not a lot of money to throw around. And so you would think we'd be well, prepared to start saving and paying down debt, investing, all of that. But with this delayed gratification, a lot of doctors, they get the first real job with that income, and it feels good to start spending money after so long and seeing all of your friends, maybe siblings who didn't take a 12-year path to their careers, already able to spend and buy homes and do these things that we haven't been able to do. So there tends to be a lifestyle explosion in terms of, we talk about lifestyle inflation, where you spend a little more than you did last year, but if you start spending 5x or 10x along with your income, you're not going to get ahead. And so, one of the things that helped me is, I think, my wife and I, we were engaged when I finished residency, but we were pretty grounded and pretty happy with, our level of spending before I finished residency, and it didn't change all that much afterwards.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of understandable. I mean, not just physicians, but anybody, when you finally start making some money, you get the salary, your bank account's getting bigger and bigger every month, and that has not been happening for a long period of time. I mean, it's understandable to say, all right, I deserve something. I need a reward here. The question is how much of that money you spend. And it sounds like, I remember just from knowing your story, just you had some things you wanted to splurge on as well. You wanted to buy some stuff, but talk to me about some of the things you did. So like, fast forward 8 years, just to give everybody a kind of a preview of that, about 8 or 9 years later, right? You looked up and started reading Mr. Money Mustache, some of these things, realizing that, hey, wait a minute, I'm financially independent. So like, take me from you were in debt as a resident to 8 years later, you've accumulated a certain amount of money. Like, what were some of the things you did? You mentioned just being frugal and kind of being happy with what you had with your wife. Was there anything else that you did kind of early on that made a kind of difference in that fork in the road that you took?
Well, one thing that kind of prevented us from even being able to spend a whole lot of money other than on trips was my first 2 years out after residency. I did traveling work. And so I was a fill-in doc. I worked in Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Minnesota, anywhere from 1 week assignment to a 9-month assignment when my wife was doing her internship as a dietitian. So I was able to save a lot of money because, these hospitals or their staffing agencies that managed our contracts basically paid for everything, paid for housing, gave me a rental car, paid for, my travel to and from. Sometimes there was a per diem for meals. So my out-of-pocket costs were next to nothing for 2 full years. And that gave us, enough to save up for, we ended up buying a waterfront lot, building a large home. We did have that lifestyle explosion a couple of years later than most people do. But, I spent intentionally. And if I didn't have something I wanted to spend money on, I would invest it, pretty much just buying into mutual funds. It started out with a SEP IRA because I was an independent contractor. I would recommend a solo 401k, which is similar, but a little bit better for a couple of reasons. Um, and I did that, and I started a taxable brokerage account, and pretty much any money that didn't have a plan, we didn't look for ways to spend it. I looked for ways to invest it.
So you're just saving a big chunk of your money, and part of that was because of your lifestyle itself, but also just the things you like to do that necessarily involve spending a lot of money. And so you mentioned setting aside in a retirement account, some kind of tax deferred account. You mentioned opening up just a regular brokerage account where you can invest in similar things, but outside of your retirement account. Did you go ahead and attack the debt that you had before that? Like, how did you approach like the order of when you get some savings, what do you spend it on early on?
Yeah. So as far as student loan debt, the average now is 200,000. Back when I finished, it was around 100,000. And I had gone to in-state public schools with scholarships throughout. So my total debt load was only like 60,000. So it wasn't a big part of my story. But I had it refinanced, or I think consolidated is the term, because it was all federal student loan debt, to a very low interest rate. And so I hung on to it for 6-7 years until I just kind of got tired of making sure that money was in the checking account every month, and I paid it off with one big check. And I did that with a signing bonus that I'd gotten for taking an anesthesia job. So that was a pretty neat way to pay it off all at once. Yeah. So again, our investing was originally through retirement accounts, and then I started a taxable brokerage account. And I actually was in some ways a real estate investor, but not intentionally. I had a condo that I had bought in residency, and we used it as a home base when I started traveling for anesthesia jobs, and we realized that we weren't using it at all. And so we found a tenant who stayed 3 or 4 years, and another tenant after that for another 3 or 4 years. And then I sold it in the maybe 2014, 2015 range. And when I finally took my first real job, my first permanent job, I built a great big beautiful home, and then the hospital went bankrupt and shut down, and that was about 3 years later, into our forever home.
Wow.
And so we weren't quite ready to let go of that dream, and we rented that place out, hoping that maybe circumstances would change, or I might have an opportunity to go back. That never materialized, but we used that as a seasonal rental and a long-term rental for 3 to 4 years. Neither one of those came anywhere close to meeting the 1% rule for rental properties, and weren't really good investments per se, but they were places I kind of felt stuck with and wasn't ready to let go of at the time. So I don't think those contributed a whole lot to our financial success. It was really just investing in mutual funds and kind of keeping it simple and brute force savings more than anything else.
Well, I do want to go back to your real estate path a little bit later on, but I love the simplicity of it. I mean, you just basically explained it in, a 5-minute, description there, but I just don't want to lose sight of how powerful that simplicity is. That if you earn money, whether you're a physician or anybody else who earns, a more significant amount of money, the brute force method of just saving a large portion of your salary as much as you can using tax deferred accounts, being disciplined. I mean, is it as simple as that? Is that pretty much what you did? I mean, I'm just curious.
That's what I did. I mean, we did have a nice sequence of returns in my career. I finished residency in 2006 and started investing. And then, 2008, things started not looking so good, and the market was dropping, but I kept investing. Market kept dropping, kept investing, bottomed out. In hindsight, we know now, March of 2009. And I just kept putting in money with every paycheck. And I actually started my taxable account in 2009. And so I was able to buy low. That was a buying opportunity. And, a bear market or a big drop in the stock market is actually beneficial when you are early in your career and you have money to invest. Right. As long as it is back, which it always has throughout the history of this country, then that can be a blessing. So yeah, I did benefit a bit from the way the market has treated us, and it's done quite well now over the last 10, 12 years. But most of what we have came from just what I earned and saved and set aside.
And that dollar cost averaging, which is what pretty much what you described, that I've heard you say this a lot on your blog, that basically if you just keep investing, if you have a, let's say a 5 or 10 year horizon for when you want to use your money or more, it always, a recession or a downturn is your friend. Like there's no reason to panic at that point. You're just keep investing, keep investing, keep investing, keep saving. That's it.
Yeah, you can look back over, all kinds of different time frames in the past, and it's hard to find a time where over a more than 10-year period you don't come out ahead by just staying the course, investing a portion of your paycheck, and eventually you'll come out ahead. Now, as long as the stock market does what it has done over the last 100+ years, we should be in pretty good shape.
And also just looking at the stock market as what it is. A lot of people think of it as these ticker symbols, but you're just owning a piece of all the business community or whatever chunk of the business community in the United States that you want to own. The question is more about like, is the economy of the United States going to recover or is it not? Like, and that's I've modeled a lot of what you do, and Jim Collins and other people with index funds as well. That's my thesis. Is just like I am going to invest in the 4,000 biggest companies in the United States, and do I believe, and do I have a kind of investment belief that over the next 10, 20 years they're going to be doing better and they're going to earn money and they're going to have good return on their investment? Like, I don't know. I would bet on the top 4,000 CEOs collectively, making good investments. It seems like
maybe not all of them, but
but collectively,
the ones that do really well. And when you own them all, you can't miss,
right.
The high performers. And I appreciate you not using the term paper assets, which it always grinds my gears when I hear that. And it's usually people who talk real estate. They say, "Oh, paper assets." But these are companies that have huge factories and office buildings and retail outlets, and they provide services and create products that we all use every day. They're not paper at all. Like they don't issue paper stock certificates, right? That's like an old thing. Real estate, you get a piece of paper, that's your deed. So, if you want to say paper assets, maybe you should call real estate that. But I think both have certainly their good points. So,
yeah, for sure. Well, so I want to get into some of the investment strategy in a little bit, but back to your story. You're saving money, you're investing, you're being disciplined about it. You hit the Great Recession, you kept investing. Talk to me about the moment when you started thinking about, wait a minute, like, I'm not sure I'm going to keep being a physician for the next 20 years. Like what was going on in your life that kind of made you even think about that?
Yeah, I was studying for a board recertification exam for American Board of Anesthesia, and spending a lot of time at the library and away from my young kids and studying minutia that didn't really apply to what I was doing now for a living. Most of the stuff was rather esoteric, at least for my community hospital anesthesia job. And so I was a little disgruntled by that. And then I passed the exam, did pretty well. And then they said, "Oh, that doesn't matter. We're switching to a different format. Now you're going to take, these questions annually, and never mind what you just spent all that time doing. We're not giving you really any credit for it." Very frustrating. And I was thinking around this time, before I knew they were going to switch to a new system, like, do I want to take this test again in 10 years? Because it's normally like every 10 years you would have to recertify. And I thought, well, I'll be in my late 50s by then. I wonder how much money I would need. And that's how I discovered Mr. Money Mustache. I had read something about him in a mainstream media article that said, if you have about 25 times what you spend in a year, you're probably good. And then I took a deep dive into all the safe withdrawal rate studies from the 1990s and more recent work by different people. And I added up my investment accounts and realized, gosh, we're spending, at this point we had our mortgage paid off, my student loan debts were in the past, and the credit card bills were $5,000-6,000 a month, and we didn't write many checks, maybe for property taxes and a few random things like piano lessons. But I was like, yeah, I think we spend maybe $70,000 a year, and multiply that by 25, and turned out we had about that much already. And I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. What do I want to do in 10 years? Probably not study for another exam. And kind of came up with a 5-year plan after talking with my wife to see what we might want to do with our lives if I wasn't tied down to a job.
So it started off the disgruntled, I'm not in control of my time here. People are kind of jerking me around a little bit with tests and exams, and that bothers me. And it led to examining your finances, saying, oh, what if I had enough money? And so you did at that point, at least based on some of the calculations that people use, 25 times your annual expenses. So talk to me a little bit more about that, because I do talk a lot about a FI number. I wrote about it in my book from the real estate perspective, but it's a big part of when somebody's starting their journey to financial independence or crossing a line where they're trying to make a transition, is making sure, do I have enough money saved up? Like, how did you think about it when you actually started? Because you didn't retire right at that point. So how did you think about it from your own personal investments?
Yeah. So there are kind of two ways of looking at your retirement expenses, your retirement needs. One is from a cash flow perspective. You can have cash coming in that equals or exceeds your expenses, and then you're good to go as long as those income sources are steady, reliable, and in perpetuity. The other way to look at it is from a nest egg standpoint, where you basically have a pile of money that you will draw from, and it will grow, and you'll draw from it, but grow, depending on what the market returns give you. And that's more of the stocks and bonds kind of approach. And everyone will take a bit of a hybrid approach, because you're going to have some income sources, whether it's interest in your savings account, dividends from stocks and bonds you own, or Social Security eventually, that sort of thing. So there's always going to be some cash flow, and you're going to have certainly some investments to serve as your nest egg. And I take more of the nest egg approach in general. And studies have shown that you're very, very unlikely to run out of money over about a 30-year time frame if you start withdrawing 4% of that initial balance, and then you can increase your annual withdrawal with inflation. And so something like a 97% success rate, looking at many, many periods of 30 years over the last 100. And so if you want to be more conservative, and some people would like to, and like me, I wasn't ready to retire right then and there. Once I figured it out, I probably could. So I thought, well, if I work a few more years, we'll have more money. Our investments will likely grow, and I'll be adding to them. And you could have say a 3% withdrawal rate, if you make good money like I did and work just a little bit longer. And actually by the time we retired, I think based on our anticipated spending, we were closer to a 2% withdrawal rate, which made me feel like our plan was really bulletproof, and that we could actually spend more than we do without jeopardizing our future in any way.
Yeah. Love it. So the question, we threw around the number, the 4% rule, and then also 25 times your earnings. Just for the math of that, I'm going to correct me if I'm wrong on that, but if it's the 4% rule, that's 25 times your earnings. That's just 1 divided by 0.04.
Exactly. Yep.
And then in your case, like let's say you had a 2%, you had enough wealth that you could withdraw 2%.
Over divided by 0.02, that's 50x. So 50, exactly. And really 3% or better is 3% is awfully conservative. And even a lot of people say 4% is conservative, because you can adjust your spending, especially if you have a little bit of a higher budget that you're planning. Like we kind of use 100,000 as our annual budget. Probably don't spend quite that much most years, but there's a lot of fluff there. We could certainly cut out a lot of travel. We could eat out less. We could do different things that don't cost as much money. And so 4% is awfully safe if you have the ability to cut back when you want to, and or the ability to earn some income with different side gigs and whatever you might want to choose.
And especially for early retirees. And this is where you get into different life situations. I know for me personally, just having the autonomy of not having to go to a job and check in and not have to take tests when I don't want to, like that to me is like up on the top of the scale, like, and being able, we're going to talk about travel a little bit. So for me, I would rather work a part-time gig or have my own business that makes, even if it made $20,000-$30,000 per year, part-time, that's a huge, so when you combine that part-time entrepreneurship with your nest egg, the 4% rule, even there becomes a lot less, risky because of the flexibility you have. Still, there's risk,
Yeah.
of course, but
And to your point, I mean, if you're making 20, 30,000 a year, that might be a half or a third of a typical family spending. And you just lowered your, nest egg requirement by that same amount, as long as you're willing to keep doing that and able to.
Yeah. So a lot of we're both in the fire community, and there's all endless debates online about how much should you have and is this safe? And, who was that? Susie Orman, who was like, attacking the fire community for this. But the idea is like working it backwards from what does your lifestyle look like and when, and then let's add up all the finances to actually meet those needs in a conservative way. And that there's different ways to do it. You've taken an approach more of I'm going to earn a high salary, save a bunch of it, invest traditionally. I started off as an entrepreneur, didn't make as much money, but I made it earlier than you did. And I just of consistently made that money and invested it in real estate. So there's so many paths. That's one of the reasons I wanted you to come on the show was just to show people that like, there's not a formula that this is the only way to do it, or Chad did it this way, or Leif did it this way. It's more about take some principles. If something that Leif is talking about works for you, then like borrow that, apply it to you, and kind of create your own path to financial independence.
Yep, I agree with that completely. And I'll also point out that you and I kind of help give the fire community a bad name in some ways, not because we're telling people anything wrong, but we do make money, with our different online ventures, and we're the most, some of the most visible people in the fire community. And so a lot of fingers are pointed. Well, he's not retired. He does this. Well, yeah, I know. I'm retired from medicine. That's what I tell people. I don't say I'm retired. It's just I've chosen to do something different. And like you say, the ability to wake up when you want to and not have to be anywhere particular on any particular day, not have to meet anyone else's standards but your own. There's a lot of value in that.
Absolutely. And work is satisfying. I enjoy projects. I would kind of drive myself and probably the rest of my family crazy if I weren't doing some sort of project. Right. So yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about life after FI. Like you made a decision, and that's a big decision, and it's big for anybody. But when you have the medical license and you've gone to all that school and you've got, there's a stature to being a physician. I mean, I think that's just in society as well. To leave that and do something different, that's a big deal. And what were some of the things, just from a practical standpoint, that you and your wife and your family looked forward to when you did have more flexibility, that when you weren't just doing that kind of schedule as a physician?
Yeah, well, you can't really do anesthesia remotely. That's not a work from home situation at all. So, and it happens at all times of day and night. Our services are needed. So, certainly opened up a lot of freedom for me to be anywhere. And pre-COVID, we were traveling quite a bit, and that was kind of our goal, was to take the years from when my kids were late grade school age until high school and travel the world together at least half the year. We got to spend a couple months in Mexico and a couple months in Spain, and we really loved those trips. We were geared up for a cruise ship to all places. We were going to go to Shanghai, China, and then that fell apart along with other plans we had to visit Vietnam, Cambodia, probably Australia, New Zealand. We were going to take about 7 months and then take a cruise ship back. But, life goes on. We're still quite happy and content. And again, I have the freedom of time, even when we're not traveling. And we've done some traveling around the U.S. I know you and I got together in Asheville, North Carolina once, and things are starting to open up a little bit. Again, COVID seems to be getting worse, and you mentioned like physicians having a stature and maybe some level of respect. I feel like that's dwindling, and you can see that with just the amount of distrust out there of science and authority, and physicians just telling everyone to please get vaccinated. We wouldn't recommend this if it wasn't good for you and good for society. And yet there's a lot of pushback and mistrust. So I don't feel like I lost all that much in terms of, my ego of being a physician and being so well respected by everyone. That's maybe a generation removed at this point, I feel.
Good point. Yeah. Don't get into medicine if if that's having that title is the main reason to do it, or having
Yeah.
control over your time and life. That's not what you do either.
No.
Well, I want to go back to the family part of it, because I think we share a big part of our motivation for doing this earlier in life is just that window of time you have. And so for those listening who happen to have kids, not everybody who's doing this has kids, but that I always looked at it as like, that's a one-time gig. Like if you don't get to spend time at that point in their life, that's gone. And so we also traveled a good bit and went to Ecuador for a year and a half, and kids got to go to school. And so I admire what you're doing and share that desire. And I even, you've taken a little bit different tact where even while you're traveling, to be more flexible, y'all are even doing homeschooling or world schooling or whatever you want to call it as well, which we've kind of debated as back and forth. Would you mind talking a little bit about that? Just the kind of the basics of when you have a family and you're traveling, like what that looks like from a practical standpoint.
Yeah. So the first year we traveled, we kind of did our own thing. My wife has headed up the schooling aspect and organized most of that. I do contribute, but she does the lion's share of the work. And we found different online resources. Khan Academy is wonderful, KAHN, and different curriculums are out there that you can subscribe to or purchase. This second year that we did the homeschool / world schooling, we had a curriculum called Bookshark, and it was provided by our school district. Actually, there's a kind of a partnership with the home schools through our school district, and that's a literature-based set of learning modules that cover most of the, I guess, core competencies, is that the term? Core curriculum,
right? And
then we do Saxon math, which is one of the more popular homeschooling math programs. And then we add our own things in, some Spanish language via the Duolingo app. And, it doesn't take 8 hours a day. The school day might be 7-8 hours. And my wife did some student teaching when our kids were younger, and she realized that there was maybe 60 to 90 minutes of instruction and actual like school work in school. And even a big chunk of that time might be spent waiting for other kids who might need more help or more time. And, you can get as much or more done at home in maybe 2 or 3 hours than kids, especially at a younger age, might get in school. Now, there's also, of course, the socialization aspect and other things that people certainly have concerns about, and I totally get that. And we've met quite a few other families that are homeschooling, and my kids were in public school until they were in third, fourth, fifth grade. So they've had their share of that too. But yeah, we really like the decision we made, and I hope we can get at least one more year of travel in when things are truly opened up post-pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've considered doing the world schooling as well, and still might, and it just gives you so much flexibility. And I love how you mentioned it's not a permanent thing. Like that for us has been where our kids are in public school right now as well. But when you have the flexibility as parents to change things for a year or two, it can be some of the most enriching experience possible, because they're going to different locations. They're getting to spend a lot of time with you as parents as well. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, that to me always just, I looked at that as an investment of time that just has such an enormous return on your relationship and on your family. So I think that's, it's not for everybody, right? But it's for those who do have that itch. It's worth rearranging your life if you have that itch to do it. It was one of the most rewarding experiences we've had. We plan on doing it. We've kind of delayed our plans with COVID as well, but we plan on doing some both in the United States type travel. We've considered going back to Washington, D.C., and it's getting an Airbnb for like 2 months and going to all the museums and doing that, and going to Washington State, going to some other places. So it's a fun experience when you can do it.
Yeah, so many options. And again, we want our kids to go to more of a traditional high school, at least if they want that experience. We'll make sure that they have that option. And I think your kids are of a similar or slightly younger age than ours. And so, these are great years to, I think, go out and do something different. And you can always come back if it doesn't work out.
Right. Yeah, it's not the if you're flat out failure. We always talk about that when we went to Ecuador. We said, if this thing is just horrible, we'll just keep moving. We'll just keep
Yeah.
traveling. And we frustrate some of our companions when we travel because we're like, we don't make plans far in advance. Like, we were making reservations for Disney this year. We're like, what? You have to make reservations for dinner like 4 months in advance? Like, we don't make reservations like at all. Like, we don't ever do that.
Yeah.
So that's more our style, but you can do it however your style of travel is. There's
Yep.
different approaches.
Yep. And it's affordable. I mean, people think, oh my gosh, how it costs $5,000 to go on vacation for a week. You're going for 2 months. It's like, yeah, but a lot of that expense is getting there, getting home, and then lodging. And when you stay for 7 days at a time, you can get a little bit of a discount on Airbnb. When you stay for a month at a time, you might get a 50% discount on the nightly rate. And you can get a place with a kitchen and cook your own meals. And you don't necessarily need to stay right where the action is because you've got time. You don't have to see all the sites in 3 days or 7 days.
Right.
You can spread it out. So maybe, when we stayed in Spain, we were in through the three largest cities, Valencia, Barcelona, and Madrid. And we stayed maybe a mile from the city center and not like right in the heart where the big hotels and most expensive apartments would be.
Yeah. The flexibility of time gives you flexibility to save a little bit of money and bargain shop. I even know people who, get on the bargain flight list and just say, all right, we're going to go somewhere for a month. And then they just look at it and say, all right, either those or those, wherever the best deals are, we're going to go. So
we booked flights to Japan for next March. I hope we'll be able to go, but it was like $200 round trip out of Chicago, which is a ways away, but we can get there. We can buy flights to Chicago. We actually booked one-way flights for $97, I think it was.
Wow.
We might take a cruise back. I don't know yet. Like you, we just kind of we'll play it by ear.
Yeah. It's fun. And then I know as a hobbyist, you're also big into the travel rewards. So we've done that as well. So if you use the credit card rewards, you combine that with flexibility, long-term travel. This is a game. I mean, it's a fun game to play.
Yep. And I'm one of those like optimizers, maximizers, trying to get the most, for my money and for my time and everything. It is kind of a fun game to play. And yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's I could talk about that for a long time. I do want to transition back. So why we're doing this, everybody's got their own unique path. You've got a family. I've got a family. This is a big part of our why and why we're trying to have financial independence earlier in life. Let's go back to the how, so the investment strategy in particular. And I always like paying attention to other people's portfolios. And I remember an article you wrote on your website, which I'll link in the show notes, where you talked about an investor policy statement. Sounds very official. It's an investor policy statement. But one of the core parts that I took away from that I started doing myself after reading that was just having an asset allocation for your entire net worth, for all of your investments, of just thinking about your investments and saying, all right, just up front, how do I want to invest my money over the long run? And so I'd be happy to share some of mine as well. But if you're willing to talk about some of just your basic investment strategy, like what do you like to invest in, kind of from a investment asset allocation standpoint, and why do you choose to do that?
Yep. So I believe my IPS calls for, and I came up with this after doing a lot of reading some books and reading some blogs and figuring out, okay, this fits my risk tolerance and my time horizon and what I like to do. So I believe I'm 70% stocks, 10% bonds, and about 20% real estate and alternatives. The IPS might say something a little bit different. It is a living document. You can revisit it, once a year and make changes as you see fit. You don't want to make changes every week. Otherwise, it's kind of worthless, because this should be like kind of a guiding principle based on things you've learned and decided makes sense for you. And that shouldn't change weekly, but it might change every couple of years. And for stocks, I don't look for individual companies that I think will outperform. The people that are paid to do that usually fail to do so consistently. And so I, like you, invest in all the stocks. I think a 3-fund portfolio is a great way to start. And that is total stock market fund, US fund, total international stock market fund, bond fund. So 3 funds. And that will give you basically all the publicly traded stocks worth owning. And something like 8,000 bonds. And then you can branch out from there. I have a REIT index fund, real estate investment trust. And then in terms of real estate, like I said, I was an accidental landlord. No longer am. Sold both of those properties, and now I look for passive real estate investments. Started with a couple of companies like Fundrise, Diversifund, that just do these e-REITs, which are basically private REITs, but they give you a lot of information on their websites. And then I did some crowdfunding where you put in maybe 10,000, 20,000 into a particular deal. And eventually it'll go full circle, maybe pay some money out to you as it goes. A lot of these are like multifamily apartment buildings that are purchased, fixed up, rents are raised, and they're resold. That's a pretty common one. It could be a ground up build for multifamily, but there's all sorts of things. There's farmland, there's, commercial buildings, self-storage, trailer parks. I know, I talked a bit about some of the challenges with that sort of thing, but yeah, I've done those, and more recently I've been investing in real estate funds, which own a lot of those types of investments, but they own them all together, sort of like a mutual fund, but for private real estate.
So this is an area that I have not done much at all. Like I kind of like you're starting. I've been a direct real estate investor. That's just the path I've taken. Just happened to do it where I own, with a business partner, we own multi-unit properties. We own single families. We own them directly. Originally, we managed them ourselves. Then we hired somebody internally to manage them. Now we outsource 95% of the management to somebody else, and we just kind of manage it from an asset manager standpoint. But this whole world of buying passive investments where you're the limited partner, where you're the money person, is a whole nother world, and it's something I'm not as familiar with. And one thing I've dabbled in is the crowdfunding a little bit. And it's been kind of lukewarm for me, whether I really, if I've done a little bit here and there. What I am more interested in, if I were not owning so much direct real estate investment, is some of the stuff you've done of syndications and funds. So could you just talk about, because those are two different things. Could you just maybe just for people who've never heard of those, define what the difference is between a syndication and a fund, what those instruments are?
Yep. So a syndication is when, a couple of people, we'll call them the general partners, decide that they're going to do a big project. This would be a commercial real estate project. Commercial does include multifamily residence, like big apartment buildings. And so let's say they need $100 million. Hopefully they're putting some of their own money into this, but then they're going to look for limited partners to put in additional money. Now, the general partners will do basically all of the work for this, right? They're going to line up the contractors. They're going to get the legal, things done. They're going to find the land, find the builders, do everything.
Often find the money, the financing as well, if there's going to be some kind of bank loan, right?
Yep. There'll be bank loans typically. And then you as a limited partner will, look over, they call it private placement memorandum, that in a pro forma, which is the forms that talk about where the money is coming from, what their expected returns are, what assumptions they're using, all of these things. And so you do need to perform some due diligence and have a little bit of a background in, at least to understand what the terms are, and maybe ask some questions to the general partners, like what is their history, what success have they had, what are the potential pitfalls here? Have they really thought out all of the potential downsides? And you're investing money, and then you'll get usually both distributions throughout the life of this investment, and then, if all goes according to plan, a good payout at the end. And returns can be, I would say, somewhere in the range of 10 to 12 to maybe closer to 20%. And oftentimes, you'll get your preferred return, which is, maybe the first 6 or 8%, 10% of the money, and then you'll start sharing in the returns with the general partner, and that might be a 20-80 or 60-40 split, where you'll get 60 or 80% of the returns, and then the general partners get the other 20 to 40% once a certain return has been met.
Got it.
Yeah.
So for you as a limited partner, and this on the syndication deal in particular, this is like one property. So there might be a big property like the $100 million property, or it could be like a, one apartment complex that was $5 or $10 million. But the
Right.
syndicator, this general partner, puts the deal together, and then you have either met them before or you're on the list of the opportunities on the line. And
Hmm.
so then you then do your due diligence to decide, is this one property and this manager, this general partner, somebody I want to invest in? If you
Yep.
do, is there usually a minimum for those types of deals? Like you have to invest 50
Yes.
grand or 100 grand or
Well,
something?
yeah, and there's a maximum number of investors. Typically, regulations for the way a lot of these are put together limit it to 29. I'm sorry, 99 investors. So if it's $100 million property, well, 99 people have to average just over 100,000 a piece. So the minimum oftentimes is, like you said, 50,000, 100,000 at a time. You might find a smaller project that will take maybe $25,000.
Got it.
But again, all your eggs are in this one basket with each of these investments. And that's kind of where real estate funds come into play. A lot of these funds are put together by these operators, general partners that will invest in maybe 6, 8, 10, 12 different projects like this, but with a lot more people. There's not that 99 investor limit. And there may be a bit more of a layer of fees involved, but you're also spreading your risk among multiple properties. Because these projects typically use leverage, like you said, a bank loan, and maybe 60 to 70% of the funds are borrowed. And so if things don't go well and somehow your value drops 30% on the asset, well, you're down to basically zero, right? So these are risky. There's a reason you need to be an accredited investor, and that means you have to have either $1 million in net worth exclusive of your primary home, or be making 200,000 a year as an individual, or 300,000 a year as a couple for at least 2 years running. So there is some background checking as far as if you qualify. And the reason they do this is because you need to be able to afford to lose all of this money. And if you can't, then you shouldn't be investing in it. So that tells you a little bit about the potential risk. But on the other hand, the potential rewards are certainly there, with strong returns possible.
Right. So you're a guy who does your due diligence. So I know you've thought about this, but what are some of from your standpoint, when you invest 100,000 in one of these funds or these syndications, what are some of the bigger risks that you worry about that you're looking for to avoid when you're investing your money?
I guess I would look at it from two standpoints. There is like macro risk. Does the U.S. economy fail? Are people who can afford to be in these, let's say, Class B apartments going to continue to have jobs in this community? And that can be a nationwide issue, or it can be in a particular community issue. Does a big employer decide to move to a different state for a more tax-friendly situation, leaving this apartment building, half vacant? That would certainly tank your investment. And then I think there are risks at the operator level, the people that you're working with, investing with. There are crooks out there, right? So it's good to see that someone has a track record, hopefully a track record within this space, or have proven themselves to be trustworthy, in other fields. And if this is someone that, and gosh, this is a bit of a tangent, but there was a podcast I listened to on a recent drive called "Death in Crypto Land," and it's about a guy from Canada who had like the largest crypto exchange up there, and he disappeared. Well, died with a death certificate in India. But then they go back and look, and he and his business partner both had just this long history of frauds. And it's incredible that people trusted their money with this guy, but you could easily see that he's been up to no good in all kinds of schemes in the past. And there's a good chance this is another one of those. Hopefully you can find out a little bit about the people you're working with before you trust them with 50 or 100 grand.
Yeah. What I find so interesting about these deals is obviously there's opportunity. Like if you're somebody who's super busy, this is something I get from a lot of people wanting to invest in real estate. They're like, wow, that takes so much time. That takes a lot of effort to get going. And, owning direct real estate and starting your own business, doing that's not for everybody for that reason in particular. And so then a lot of people are drawn to, well, I like real estate, but I want to invest in these passive syndications. And from my evaluation of it, there's a layer of these deals that's exactly the same as investing directly. Just what you mentioned, the macro risk. There's also the property risk. There's also, are you getting the right debt? What happens if you can't refinance it? What happens if the market changes? So there's all these principles that I talk about all the time with real estate, which are pretty fundamental. They apply everywhere. Yeah. But then there's this added layer of you're trusting your money with some operator, some general partner. And I've often heard from other people who I've asked about these investments like that is the biggest thing you need to start with in terms of looking for red flags, of digging in. Have you found any, I don't know, to say shortcuts, but just any process that you can try to evaluate the people who you meet? I mean, is it just, I just want to talk to them on the phone and see if I trust them? Is it get referrals? Like, I'm just curious if you've found a way to make yourself comfortable with the operators themselves.
Yeah. So my friend Peter Kim, he's an anesthesiologist out in California, and he runs a site called Passive Income MD, and he actually teaches a course that's all about this. It's how to properly vet and completely understand what you're investing in with syndications and funds. And personally, I haven't done much in the way of syndications. I've gone the fund route just because I feel like it does take less due diligence, because these are operators that have grown larger and are working across multiple properties. Now, obviously, you can get into trouble doing these, but I've worked with funds that people I know and trust have invested with for quite a long time and have had good results with. So the way like the largest fund I'm in works, they aim to grow the net asset value of the assets in the fund by about 3 to 5% a year, while distributing 6% in a tax neutral or tax-free manner. And so they're not aiming sky high. They're trying to give you back about 10% returns overall, but that 6% cash flow with no tax liability is awfully appealing.
Just to go into the weeds on that, are they when for no tax liability, do they use depreciation to shelter that? Is that because it's owned by a self-directed IRA or something? Like how does that?
It's not within a self-directed IRA. I just own this with taxable money, but some of it is return of principal, I believe. At least it's called that. They do use depreciation to shelter some income, and they've got very smart accountants that know how to work this K1 and distribute the money in a way that you shouldn't owe much, if any, tax. Now, it does depend a little bit on the makeup of the assets in the fund. When COVID hit, they didn't feel comfortable going in on maybe new equity deals. So they did some preferred equity, which is kind of a debt equity hybrid. And that's a little less tax efficient. So if the fund ended up being mostly preferred equity, we'd probably owe a little bit of tax on the distribution. But so far, I think there's something like a 60-40 mix of equity to preferred equity. And so far, we haven't had to pay any tax on those distributions. So.
Yeah, that's smart. Interesting. And it goes back to one of the benefits of real estate. I mean, you're going back to your whole portfolio, 70% stocks, and you have that broken down between domestic and international. So that's right, the lion's share. Yeah. Lion's share of what you do. And then you have this 20%, which is in real estate and or alternative. So even all of these funds all fit within that, maybe like a 10 or 15, I guess, I'm guessing 10 or 15% of what your entire net worth is.
Yeah.
Is that
I
right?
can afford to take risk there, and so I know people that go all in on these things, and that makes me a little nervous. Like, I think diversification is a wonderful thing, and both among your stocks and among your real estate, and having both. And that's my approach.
Yeah, it's actually been my approach too. And being friends with you and other people in the fire community, it's been helpful for me to get a bigger perspective. Like I built my wealth through a business, which was owning real estate. And so I was all in, 100% for a long time, but I've been trying for years to diversify that between particularly my retirement accounts going into stocks. And so index funds there. And I think I'm about 25% now stocks, and then about 10% cash, which is similar to what you're kind of where you are. And then the rest of it is real estate and, private kind of real estate stuff. So, kind of on the opposite, you flip it around. It's about it's very similar, but I mean, long run, I'm not like set on the percentages, but 20 years from now, if I were 50, 40, or let's say, what would that be? Like maybe 40, like stocks and real estate, maybe 10% alternatives, 10%. Did I get my numbers right? Yeah. 10% cash or something like that would be about, I would be happy with that. So it's, over the long run, I'm going to continue diversifying. It's one of the most important principles I've learned from you, from other people, is that you don't want all your eggs in one basket. You don't want it all in one market. You don't want it all in one asset class. You've built this mountain of wealth. You want to preserve it. And so just spreading it out is one of the keys at this point.
And one of the beautiful things about, having financial independence and maybe even more is that you can start to take different risks. You keep that, nest egg of 25 or 30 times what you're going to spend in a sensible, mix of stocks, bonds, real estate. But then you've got extra now, and you can take that extra and you can take bigger risks with it. You can do one of those syndications where it might be 20% or zero, and you're not going to be devastated if it becomes zero, but you'll become that much wealthier, able to leave that much more of a legacy if, some of those risks turn out in your favor.
Yep, no doubt. Well, that's a good segue. I want to transition to, we've talked about financial independence. We've talked about your journey as a physician, why you wanted to leave that profession just from personal reasons, and then how you did it with the investment portfolio, with the savings, the different asset allocations. You and I both now find ourselves, we're in a place in our 40s, and we're not done yet. We're still having fun doing work. You have an online business called Physician on Fire. It's a business. It makes money. I have a Coach Carson business, which we both happen to enjoy this, or we wouldn't be doing it in the first place. This is a fun kind of hobby lifestyle business as well, but it does make money. And so I wanted to talk some about your philosophy of giving. Like you have enough to be financially independent. I do as well. But we still have these businesses, and we enjoy making money. We like it. We do it. And so you have a philosophy on your website, your online business, which inspired me to do the same, where you give away 50% of your profits using what's called a donor advisor fund. So could you talk a little bit more about that? What led you to start doing that, and maybe a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah. So one of the things that was a hang up for me in deciding to leave my profession was that there's so much more earning potential there. And even if I didn't need the money, I could do good things with that money. And so I decided to make it a goal to have 10% of our nest egg, or a number equal to that, set aside for future giving. And the best vehicle I found to do that with is a donor advised fund. And what that is, it's essentially a charity that you give your money to, but then that money can be residing in an account where you can invest the money. So Vanguard Charitable, that's a donor advised fund. Fidelity has one, Schwab has one. I have mine with both Fidelity and Vanguard, although I recommend Fidelity. I think they have the easiest one to use, and you only need $5,000 to get started if you don't want to start out with $25,000, which is what Vanguard requires. And then you can give $50 at a time from a Fidelity account, which we do stuff like that when our kids' school would have like a fundraiser, and I didn't want to send them around the neighborhood to sell cookies and popcorn and junk to neighbors who know we don't need the money, So we would just donate to the school instead. Well, here's 50 or $100, since we're not going to sell your popcorn. Yeah, it's great. But how it works is you donate a chunk of money. We started with, I think, a high 5-figure amount. We've done a couple of 6-figure donations to this donor advised fund, and you take a tax deduction for the amount that you give, assuming you itemize deductions, which you will if you give that much to the charity, right? And it also kind of helps make sure that you do benefit from all the charitable giving you're doing that year, because you'll exceed your standard deduction by quite a bit. And then you can give that money out from the donor advised fund account whenever you want to. It can be the same year, it could be the next day, or it could be something like we're doing, which is you treat that fund as kind of an endowment and give maybe 4%, 5%, maybe 10%, since we're still growing it, to charity each year in the form of grants from the fund. So tax deduction on the way in, tax-free growth. There are some fees associated with the money there. About 0.6% is common. And that's pretty similar to the tax drag that you would see on that money if you kept it invested outside of a donor advised fund. And then when it's in there, you can invest in index funds just like you would in your 401k or in a brokerage account. So yeah, we've seen ours grow over the years, despite giving out tens of thousands of dollars a year. I think we're closing in on $500,000 in the balance in our donor advised funds. And so even following a 4% rule, we can give away 20 grand a year. But I don't think we need to be that conservative, because the consequences of running out of money there are not as dire as they are running out of money in my own personal accounts. And so we tend to be a little more generous in that way. But yeah, I think it's awesome that you've made that pledge to give out half of your profits, and it's something you can afford to do. So kudos to you.
Yeah, you as well. And I think it's something I feel like a rookie sometimes. I've told people in this area of giving, of how am I going to make a difference? I feel like I'm an entrepreneur, and I like entrepreneurship because if it's done well, you're helping people and you're getting money in exchange. Obviously, there's businesses who don't do that, but also I think there's a lot of society where traditional business structures don't solve some of the problems that we think should be solved. So this is it's just been I call myself a rookie because I'm just learning a lot about how can money that's donated make a difference? How could it be wasted? Where should this be helpful at? So it's been a lot of learning for me about, particularly my local community. Affordable housing is a big one that I'm, trying to learn a lot more about. A lot about transportation, infrastructure, and equity with that. Those are just some of my personal kind of things. Is there anything that you have been learning about or interested in terms of charitable giving that's kind of been on your radar?
Well, let me start by just adding on one point that I didn't make with the donor advised fund. It is the most tax advantageous, which means you can give the most for the amount of money you're giving up by donating appreciated securities or assets funds. So if you've got lots of a mutual fund or a stock from 10 years ago that is quadrupled or 10x in value, you can donate that stock to the donor advised fund. And then there are no capital gains realized by anyone, and you get the current value of that stock or fund as long as you had it for a year or more when you donate it. As far as where we like to give our money and what we've learned, there's this term called effective altruism, which is looking at what will have the most impact really on the world and the people in it. And so that tends to be more international things like preventing cholera in third world countries, providing fresh water, ways to take care of human waste, that sort of thing. But we also like to see money used close to home, and we do, like you, donate to local causes that are helping with poverty, people that can't pay their gas bill in the winter, local food shelves and shelters and that sort of thing too. So we try to spread it around, diversify. Again, I think there's value in diversification. So do that with our donated money as well.
Very cool. Well, it's just inspiring here. $500,000 inside of a donor advised fund. I've been setting some personal goals for myself as well. It's just been a fun transition, which you've kind of inspired me on to say, all right, well, how much money could I give away? And it's sort of led me past some ambivalence with my entrepreneurship here with Coach Carson. It's like, well, I am going to turn this into a business because I would like to give away more money and I would like to make a difference in that way. So just appreciate you kind of taking the lead on that and sharing that. And I'm going to provide a link for others who are interested in this. You have some great articles on setting up a donor advised fund. You do some comparisons between Vanguard and Fidelity. So as is the case with all of your website, just very detailed, excellent information. Everybody could tell just listening to you. I know on the tax strategies and the thoughtfulness on investment standpoint. So I highly recommend Leif site. I'm giving you some plugs there, Leif.
Thanks, man.
But definitely like what you do and think people will benefit from it.
Yeah, cool.
Well, my final question I always like to ask is that people listening to this are going to be on various points of their journey to financial independence. But that's the common theme on this podcast is helping people get to financial independence. And so do you have any final tip or final advice for people who are especially early on in their journey to financial independence? What would you give them as kind of a parting advice?
Yeah, the most important thing is to grow the gap between what you spend and what you earn. Whether you do that by finding ways to spend a bit less or by earning more, it doesn't matter. If you can do both, more power to you. But if you want to reach financial independence in relatively short order, that is the most effective way. It's not what you invest in, it's how much you invest, how much you save.
Well said. Seems simple, not always easy to do, but that's the formula, right? That's it. So great. Well, really appreciate your time, Leif. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to provide links to your website and to a lot of the things we talked about today. Excellent. And I look forward to connecting again, hopefully in person at some point, so we can have another beer together.
I would love that.
All right. Sounds good. See you soon.
All right. Cheers.
If you'd like more details on today's guest or the links that we discussed in today's episode, you can find a link to the show notes for today's episode on the podcast description in your podcast player or in the video description in YouTube. And if you're new here, please consider hitting the subscription button in your favorite podcast player or YouTube so you'll be notified each Monday morning with my new episode. This is also the time of the show when I give away a copy of my book, Retire Early with Real Estate, to one listener who recently left a review. This week's winner goes by the username MH333. And they left a review on Apple Podcasts on May 8th, 2021, and it goes like this. You definitely want Chad as your coach. Coach Carson is unlike any other real estate teacher out there. His ability to calmly and succinctly break down complex real estate investing ideas is amazing. Although I've been investing in real estate for 15 plus years, I'm still learning a ton from Coach's episodes. This podcast is the natural extension of his book, Retire Early with Real Estate. Well done, Coach. So thank you so much for that review. Really appreciate it. If you'll send us an email at podcast@coachcarson.com, we'll be happy to send you a copy of my book. And it sounds like you already have it, but feel free to share that with a friend, with a family member, and pass it on. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I have not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and I'm your host for the Real Estate and Financial Independence podcast, which is all about helping you invest in real estate, achieve financial independence, and do more of what matters. See you next time.